Close your eyes and imagine a world wrapped in white, where endless horizons of snow stretch beneath skies filled with stars brighter than we will ever see again. This is the Ice Age, a time when mammoths wandered like living mountains, when humans huddled close to glowing fires, and when survival meant listening to the whispers of the wind. Yet it was also a time of beauty, of silence so deep it felt eternal, of nights where the earth itself seemed to dream. Tonight, let us drift back into that frozen world and walk gently through the age of snow. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back to a world wrapped in white, where the Ice Age stretched endlessly across the horizon, and every dawn began not with warmth, but with the pale glow of a reluctant sun rising over frozen plains, casting long shadows across glittering snowfields, shaped by winds that whispered like ancient voices, while glaciers groaned in the distance, slow rivers of ice pressing patiently against the bones of the earth. And in this vast cathedral of silence, life endured with quiet resilience. Woolly mammoths moved like living mountains, shaggy and solemn, their curling tusks gleaming against the horizon. Reindeer walked in careful lines across the tundra, hooves striking frost with the sound of drums, while saber-toothed cats and dire wolves slipped like shadows at the edges of vision, reminding all who walk there that survival was never certain. Yet even here, in a land of endless frost, humanity found belonging. Their shelters built of bone and hide, their fires crackling softly in the darkness, their children pressed close against the warmth of mothers' arms as elders whispered prayers into the air, acknowledging spirits in the snow, the beasts, and the breath of the earth itself. For to them, the Ice Age was not emptiness, but a presence, a teacher, alive with lessons of patience and reverence. And so each morning began with quiet tasks. Hunters stepping into the white horizon, spears of stone glinting beneath the pale sky, their movements bound in unity, while gatherers searched with careful hands for roots hidden deep beneath the frozen ground, berries clinging stubbornly to brittle branches. And though little was given, nothing was wasted, for life itself was measured not in plenty, but in balance, in trust, in the silent knowledge that to take only what was needed was to survive. And around the fire, as the flames cracked and breathed, stories carried the people forward, spoken not for entertainment, but for survival. Words passed from elder to child like maps of sound, guiding them through dangers and wonders yet unseen. Stories of mammoths whose spirits walked beside them, of hunters whose courage lit the dark, of ancestors who watched from beyond the veil of night. And in these words they found strength as real as meat or fire, strength to face the cold, the hunger, the silence. And still, within the stillness of the frozen dawn, there was beauty. For frost turned the fur of wolves to silver. Mammoth calls rolled like thunder over the plains. And sometimes, when night fell, the northern lights shimmered across the sky in waves of green and violet, reminding the people that even in a world of cold, there was wonder, there was light. And beneath the endless stars, brighter than any we know today, children drifted to sleep beside embers, their dreams filled with giants and spirits, with fire and snow, while their parents kept watch, knowing that in this frozen dawn, they were small, yet never alone, part of a world vast and eternal, breathing softly beneath the weight of ice. Close your eyes and return to the frozen dawn of the Ice Age, when the earth was ruled not by men, but by giants, immense creatures whose very presence reshaped the land, and whose shadows stretched across endless horizons of snow. For it was a world where the woolly mammoth moved like a walking mountain, its shaggy coat swaying with each step, its long ivory tusks curling like frozen moons. And when it raised its head and called, the sound rolled across the tundra like thunder over ice. A reminder that life here belonged first to the great beasts. Around them roamed the giant sloths, slow and deliberate, pulling branches down with massive claws, each movement heavy but certain, as though they carried the patience of centuries within their bones. And in the forests, cave bears lumbered, in search of food, their size dwarfing even the bravest hunter, their strength unmatched by any human hand. And where the plains stretched wide, herds of steppe bison thundered in their thousands, hooves striking the earth in rhythms that made the ground tremble, rivers of muscle and fur surging together beneath the pale sky. Yet it was not only the gentle giants that ruled this dawn, but predators whose names echo even now. Saber-toothed cats crouched in silence, their long fangs catching the light of the low sun. Dire wolves moving in careful packs, larger and fiercer than any wolf that survives today, their eyes sharp, their breath rising in clouds that mingled with the mist, all of them bound together in the delicate balance of survival. Predator and prey locked in a slow dance across the frozen plains, and into this world of giants stepped humankind, small in body but vast in spirit, wrapped in furs stitched from the hides of their hunts, carrying spears tipped with flint, their shelters framed with the bones of mammoths, their fires glowing faintly against the immensity of the night. And though they were dwarfed by the creatures around them, they did not see themselves as rulers or as conquerors, but as part of the rhythm, a single breath within the great exhale of the world, learning to walk softly in the presence of giants, learning to wait, to watch, to respect, for to take without reverence meant misfortune, and to move carelessly beneath the gaze of mammoths or the eyes of wolves was to invite death. And so each dawn was lived as a prayer, every hunt a song, every fire a beacon. And when the people whispered stories to their children, they spoke of these giants not only as beasts, but as teachers, as guardians, as forces older and wiser than themselves, shaping the path of human survival. For the mammoth gave not just meat, but shelter and warmth. Its hide turned into tents, its bones into homes, its tusks carved with symbols of memory, while the predators taught vigilance, courage, and the humility of knowing that life is always borrowed from the earth. And under skies streaked with auroras, with stars burning brighter than we will ever see again, the people closed their eyes and listened to the calls of mammoths rolling through the night, to the wolves howling across the plains, to the silence of the snow itself. And in that stillness they felt both small and infinite, children of giants, walking gently in a world vast beyond measure, held not by power but by reverence, not by conquest but by balance. And in the frozen dawn they carried within them the eternal memory that they once lived side by side with giants. They say survival in the Ice Age was impossible without, and each successful hunt carried not pride but gratitude, each failure a lesson, each scar a memory, until the people themselves became living maps of survival, carrying forward the wisdom of countless encounters with giants, whispering into the long night that to live in the shadow of the mammoth was to live with reverence, and to strike the giant down was to honor the ancient truth that all life is shared, all life is fleeting, and all life is part of the same endless cycle beneath the frozen sky. In the deep silence of the Ice Age night, when the breath of mammoths steamed against the stars and the low growl of predators echoed across frozen valleys, humanity's answer to darkness was fire, a fragile circle of light that glowed defiantly amid the immensity of giants. For while mammoths towered and bison stampeded, while cave bears claimed their dens and saber-toothed cats stalked the edge of the firelight, humans had learned to shape a power no beast could command, a power not of muscle or claw, but of spark and flame. coaxed from stone, struck against stone, from embers carried in bundles across miles of snow, from fat dripping onto wood, igniting, a blaze that turned the coldest night into shelter. Yet fire was not only warmth, it was also a wall, a boundary against the howling dark. For dire wolves would circle but rarely cross the glow. Mammoths might pause at the sight of flickering flames, and within that fragile barrier the people gathered, their bodies pressed close, their voices soft, their songs rising and mingling with the crackle of wood, turning fear into ritual, silence into story, survival into something that felt like belonging. Around these fires, giants were transformed from threats into tales, their immense forms softened by imagination, so that mammoths became ancestral teachers who carried the wisdom of the earth in their tusks, and wolves became companions whose howls mapped the unseen distances, and bison became symbols of strength, whose herds mirrored the endless cycles of the stars. Firelight was the loom on which these stories were woven, casting shadows against cave walls where hands painted ochre mammoths, reindeer and lions, hands that trembled not with fear but with awe, as if the flicker of flame itself was guiding the shapes, turning memory into vision, vision into permanence, so that long after the fire died, the giants remained alive in color, etched into stone, a chorus of presence whispering to those who would come later. We shared this world. We walked beneath the same sky. And fire did more than tell stories. It gave the people mastery of food. For meat roasted slowly on embers carried deeper nourishment than flesh eaten raw. Marrow cracked open by heat spilled its richness. Fat melted into fuel that burned through the long nights. And smoke itself preserved the meat of giants, allowing hunters to store the bounty of a single mammoth for weeks, even months, so that winter's grip could be endured not in hunger, but in strength. Still, the gift of fire was not free, for it demanded constant tending, constant vigilance, the carrying of coals wrapped in moss from camp to camp, the gathering of wood even when snow buried the land, the guarding of flame as though it were itself alive, a spirit that, if neglected, could vanish, leaving only cold and silence, and so fires became as sacred as the beasts themselves. Each hearth tended with care, each spark considered a blessing, and in this reverence, humanity found a rhythm, a pulse that bound them together as tightly as kinship. For to share fire was to share survival. To sit within its circle was to belong. Children listened to elders describe the hunts, their eyes wide in the firelight, their hands tracing the air as they imagined mammoths falling, wolves circling, rivers swelling with fish. And in this teaching, fire became a library, a keeper of memory, a place where no knowledge was lost, for words spoken in its glow became chants, chants became stories, stories became myths, and myths carried truths more enduring than any spear or arrow, truths of patience, respect, balance, and courage. And yet, in all its gifts, fire was also fragile, a flicker against the immensity of the Ice Age, a small defiance in a world where giants ruled, and perhaps that fragility was what made it sacred, what gave it meaning. For in the presence of beings larger, stronger, faster, fire was the one ally humanity could call its own, the one element that bent to their hands, glowing against the cold, whispering of warmth, memory, and hope. And so when mammoths moved across the snow, when dire wolves howled at the edge of camp, when saber-toothed cats prowled in silence, humans did not cower but drew closer to their flames, singing softly into the night, songs that spoke of gratitude and endurance, songs that rose into the darkness as if to tell the giants themselves that though humans were small, though their lives were fragile, they carried within them a light that even the longest winter could not extinguish. And thus the fires among giants were more than survival. They were symbols, anchors, promises, proof that humanity's true strength was not in size, nor in speed, nor in claw or tusk, but in the quiet brilliance of shaping flame into shelter, memory into meaning, and fear into reverence, and in the glow of these fires. Beneath the gaze of giants, humanity learned not only how to endure the Ice Age, but how to dream within it. In the stillness of the Ice Age world, before villages, before roads, there were giants not of fur or tusk, but of ice and water, vast. Forces that shaped the land as surely as mammoths shaped the plains. For glaciers stretched like endless white walls across the horizon, towering higher than forests, their bodies moving so slowly that centuries passed like heartbeats, grinding stone to dust, carving valleys deep enough to cradle rivers. And though their motion was unseen to the human eye, their presence was everywhere, a breath of cold that whispered through every dawn, a weight pressing silently against the earth, sculpting mountains and plains alike. And these icy giants were both protectors and destroyers, offering fresh streams from their melting edges while burying entire landscapes beneath their frozen weight. Rivers were born from their release, torrents of meltwater snaking across tundra and steppe, weaving silver paths through the wilderness, nourishing moss and grass that fed herds of reindeer, bison and mammoth, and in turn feeding the people who followed those herds, who learned to trace the water's path as if it were a guide. For rivers did not merely quench thirst, they were highways through an otherwise frozen land, carrying hunters toward new valleys, toward fresh migrations, toward stories yet to unfold. And when these rivers widened into lakes, their surfaces mirrored the sky like glass, holding still the silhouettes of birds wheeling overhead, geese and swans who themselves followed the rhythms of thaw and freeze, their migrations teaching humanity that water was alive with cycles, that even the hardest winter must one day soften. Yet it was not only rivers and lakes that shaped life, but also the sea itself. For in the Ice Age, oceans drew back as the glaciers drank their waters, lowering the tides and revealing hidden pathways of land, bridges across worlds, where mammoths, steppe lions, and eventually people crossed into new continents, their footprints pressed into soil that had once been sea floor. And these crossings, like the Great Bridge of Beringia, were not merely passages of survival, but moments that would ripple into the future of humanity. For in following water's retreat, humans expanded the edges of their world, spreading stories, tools, and fire into lands that had never before known their presence. But the sea remained a giant of mystery, its tides breathing in and out with a rhythm older than fire, its depths concealing creatures even larger than mammoths, whales that sang in tones deeper than the earth itself, fish that glimmered like silver blades in the dark water, seals that hauled themselves onto ice shelves with bodies sleek and strong. And though many of these beings lived far from human camps, their presence was felt in the bones washed ashore, in the feathers of seabirds drifting inland, in the storms that rolled across the coasts. And people came to understand that the waters, like the beasts, had spirits of their own, unseen but immense. And so they told stories of river gods and sea mothers, of beings who lived beneath the waves, shaping the tides, guiding the fish, teaching humans respect for the life that came from beyond the shore. In these stories, water was not merely a resource, it was kin, a giant whose moods could bless or curse, whose floods could both feed and drown. And so humans treated rivers as sacred, offering stones, shells, or carved bones at their banks, whispering thanks before crossing. For to walk with water was to walk with power, and this reverence gave meaning to the endless journey of survival. Yet water was also tied to fire, its opposite and its complement. The fire gave warmth while water gave nourishment, and ice, the frozen form of water, gave both challenge and shield, preserving food, shaping the migration of herds, building natural walls of defense against predators so that humans learned to balance the three: fire for the circle of warmth, water for the circle of life, ice for the circle of time. And within this balance they found continuity, a rhythm that echoed in their stories, in the songs sung at riversides, in the marks carved into the frozen giants that shaped the changing of seasons, as if to say, learning to live giants of ice and water, humanity did more than survive. We too belonged to their cycle. They began to dream of horizons wider than rivers, grew humble deeper than seas, walking the edges of glaciers, even than ice drinking from rivers that flowed like silver arteries across the earth. Cathedrals rose from staring at oceans whose reached toward the clouds. The Ice Age people lived beneath the shadow of giants already older than memory, the mountains and skies themselves, for cliffs rose like guardians at the edge of valleys, their faces scarred with the marks of endless time. And to the people who walked the tundra with mammoths and bison, these stone giants were both home and trial, offering caves in which to take shelter, crevices where firelight could flicker, against walls alive with painted shapes, yet also cliffs that could crumble without warning, slopes that sent rocks thundering like the roar of lions, avalanches that buried whole paths in silence. Still, the mountains were more than danger. They were the bones of the world, ancient bodies that carried snow upon their shoulders, that caught the sun at dawn and turned it gold, that glowed red at dusk as though fire itself lived in their veins. And in their presence, humans felt themselves small, yet also connected to something vast and eternal. For each peak was a marker against the endless sky, guiding journeys across plains, teaching direction long before compasses, whispering permanence in a world where herds and seasons always moved. Within these mountains, caves became sacred chambers, their darkness transformed by human imagination. For when firelight met stone walls, shapes emerged: mammoths, lions, horses, handprints pressed in ochre and charcoal, as if the stone giants themselves had opened their skins to receive memory, to hold the breath of human dreams inside their ribs. And each mark, each painted line, was not merely art, but conversation, a dialogue between fragile humans and the eternal rock that cradled them, saying, "We are here, we walk beside giants, and though we are small, our stories belong among yours." And above the stone giants stretched an even greater presence, the sky, vast and endless, a dome that no spear could pierce, no fire could warm. Yet every night it revealed its giants too, constellations shaped in the eyes of those who looked. Upward, hunters traced among the stars, mammoths walking across the Milky Way, great birds taking flight in arcs of light. And though these patterns were born from imagination, they felt as real as any creature on Earth. For to the people who sang beneath them, the stars were not distant suns, but spirits, ancestors, or watchers, whose gaze kept the world in balance. The moon drifted among them, waxing and waning like a heartbeat, sometimes round and glowing like a great mammoth's eye, sometimes thin as a claw mark in the dark, and its cycle taught people the rhythm of time, guiding hunts, migrations, and stories, while the sun itself, that daily giant, gave life through warmth and light, rising without fail, a promise that even the coldest night must end. Yet for all their grandeur, these giants of stone and sky were not aloof. They touched human life intimately, guiding footsteps across valleys, offering echoes to songs sung into the dark, listening silently as fires crackled at their bases. And so mountains became altars, the sky became a canvas, and humans found themselves both humbled and uplifted. For though they were small beneath such immensities, they could sing, paint, dream, and remember, acts that turned fragility into permanence. In the rhythm of their days and nights, people came to see themselves as part of this greater body, children of earth and sky, walking between stone and stars, carrying sparks of fire and whispers of stories into the vastness. And though the mountains stood unmoving, and the stars wheeled endlessly above, humanity learned to move within their gaze with reverence, building lives not against, but within the presence of giants, finding comfort in their constancy, awe in their silence, and meaning in the way their immensity could cradle the smallest flame, the softest song, the briefest life, until in time, humans understood that the giants of stone and sky were not separate at all, but kin, sharing the same breath of eternity, holding within them the memory of every step, every spark, every dream whispered into the Ice Age night. Across the endless steppes of the Ice Age, where winds swept low and grasses rippled like an ocean of frost, the greatest giants were not of stone or ice, but of movement, living rivers of muscle and fur, herds that thundered across the land in numbers so vast that the earth itself seemed to breathe with them. For mammoths marched with steady patience, their tusks curving like the moons of another world, their great feet pressing the snow into pathways that smaller creatures would later follow, while bison surged in waves, horns lowered, their breath steaming in unison as they moved like storms over the plains, and reindeer streamed along frozen valleys in lines so long they seemed endless. Each step part of a rhythm older than memory, a cycle that carried them from summer pastures to winter refuge, guided not by maps but by instinct, as if the land itself whispered directions to their blood. To the people who lived beside them, these herds were both sustenance and teacher, providing meat, hide, bone, and sinew for survival, yet also revealing the deeper truth of the world, that life was a pattern of departure and return, of hunger and abundance, of movement and rest, and to follow the herds was not simply to hunt, but to learn the pulse of the earth itself. Hunters studied their trails with eyes sharpened by necessity, reading the bent grass, the churned mud, the faint prints pressed into snow, and in these signs they saw more than prey. They saw the language of migration, a language that spoke of seasons shifting, rivers swelling, storms coming, and they learned to listen, to follow, to wait, because patience was the only way to walk beside giants. And when a mammoth fell, it was never merely a kill, but a moment of reverence, the gathering of an entire community around a body that could feed and clothe them for months. The fire-lit songs of thanks rising into the night to honor the spirit of the fallen, for in giving itself, the giant became part of the people, and the people became part of its memory, a circle as endless as the migrations themselves. Yet even beyond the hunts, there was awe in the simple watching of herds, the way mammoth calves stumbled beside their mothers, the way bison wheeled suddenly like a storm-changing course, the way reindeer lifted their heads all at once as if listening to something no human could hear. And in these moments, people felt the presence of something greater than survival, a rhythm of belonging, as though the herds were not only flesh and blood, but also living embodiments of the land's heartbeat. And migrations were not confined to animals alone, for humans too became migrants, their camps rising and falling with the tides of the herds, their journeys stretching across continents, their footprints weaving through time like threads of a tapestry, each step carrying fire, memory, and story into new lands, until the world itself was stitched together by paths of movement, invisible roads written not in stone, but in repetition, in the returning each year to the same valleys, the same rivers, the same passes through mountains, roads so ancient that even before words, they were known. And to walk these paths was to join a lineage that stretched backward through ancestors, forward into children, outward into every living thing that moved with the seasons. For migration was not choice, but law, a gentle law written into the marrow, of bone, reminding all beings, mammoth, bison, reindeer, and human alike, that to live was to move, to follow the call of grass, water, warmth, and return. And so beneath the wide sky, amid the breath of countless beasts, humanity found its place, not above or apart, but within the great migration of life, their small fires flickering along the trails of giants, their songs rising like smoke into the cold air, joining the chorus of hooves, trunks, and antlers, until the world itself seemed to sing. And in that song, the people discovered something deeper than survival, a sense of being carried, of being part of the Earth's eternal journey, of walking not alone but forever in the company of giants. In the dim glow of Ice Age firelight, beyond the circle of warmth where human voices murmured and sparks rose toward the stars, there waited other giants, not of herds or glaciers, but of shadow and silence, predators whose presence shaped the nights as surely as mammoths shaped the plains. For saber-toothed cats stalked with fangs long as a man's hand, their bodies heavy with muscle, their movements low and deliberate, so silent that a hunter could feel the watching eyes long before hearing the padded step, while cave lions, larger than any lion known today, prowled the edges of valleys, their golden coats melting into tall grass, their roars rolling like thunder across the tundra, a sound that shook the chest and reminded all who heard it that power belonged not only to numbers but to patience and teeth. Dire wolves, heavier and stronger than the wolves that would one day remain, circled in packs, their howls carrying over frozen ridges, weaving a music of hunger and unity that made even mammoths tighten their herds. And to the people huddled close to their fires, those howls were both warning and lesson, for predators taught vigilance, shaping the rhythm of camp life, the gathering of children close, the placement of fires at the camp's edge, the choice of cliffs and caves for shelter, all small acts of defiance against the vast patience of hunters who could wait for days, in silence. Yet predators were more than threats. They were teachers and from this, humans learned strategy, patience, and the power of cooperation, lessons that transformed survival from chance into choice. And still, awe ran deeper than fear, for predators were woven into the very stories told around the fire, spirits of strength, cunning, and shadow, their images painted in ochre on cave walls alongside mammoths and bison, their forms honored even as their presence haunted, because people knew that predators were necessary, that without their pressure, the herds would grow too vast, the balance would falter, the rhythm would break. And so predators, though feared, were also revered as keepers of the cycle, guardians of balance in a world too immense to belong to one creature alone. And within the heart of each story lay recognition that humanity itself was also predator, fragile yet cunning, weak in body but strong in fire and patience, walking the thin line between hunted and hunter, kin to both the prey they pursued and the beasts that pursued them. And in this duality lay a strange kind of kinship, as if humans, lions, wolves, and saber-tooths were all participants in the same great game, each testing the other, each shaping the other's fate. Still, the nights were heavy with tension, when firelight flickered against the eyes that gleamed just beyond its reach, when the snap of a twig made hunters grip their spears, when the silence itself seemed alive. For in those moments the presence of predators was not just outside the camp, but inside the heart, a constant reminder that life was always fragile, always contested, always shared. And yet, from this closeness to danger, something remarkable grew. Courage. The kind that does not roar or boast but breathes slowly in the dark, holding steady, whispering songs, keeping the fire alive, trusting that small flames and steady hearts could endure even when surrounded by giants of fang and claw. And so humanity lived with predators not as enemies to be destroyed, but as shadows to be respected, forces to be learned from, woven into myth and memory, until their images lived forever, not only in caves, but in the human spirit itself. Symbols of vigilance, patience, and the deep truth that survival is never solitary, but always shared, always balanced, always shaped by the presence of giants in the night. In the stillness of caves where the air hung heavy with damp stone and the scent of ash, humanity encountered another kind of giant. Not mammoths on the plains or lions in the grass, but the vast immensity of imagination itself, a force as powerful and enduring as glaciers. For within the flickering glow of torches on rough stone walls, hands traced shapes of bison, mammoths, horses, and lions, each line etched not only in ochre and charcoal, but in memory, in reverence, in the deep need to speak to the silence with images that would outlast breath. And in those moments, the first seeds of spirit and story were born, giving shape to a truth older than language, that humans were not only survivors, but dreamers, weaving meaning into the world around them. In caves like Chauvet and Lascaux, deep in the earth where darkness swallowed all but the flame, the walls came alive with running herds, with spirals of dots and handprints pressed in red, as if people reached through stone itself to say, "We are here, we endure." And in these gestures, the giants of the mind rose as tall as glaciers, for to tell a story was to create permanence, to fix fleeting breath into eternity. Around fires, stories carried spirits into the night, tales of animals who were not merely beasts but guides, protectors and ancestors, mammoths who bore the earth on their backs, lions who guarded the sun, birds whose wings carried prayers to the sky. And in these myths, fear became reverence, survival became ceremony, danger became teaching, until every hunt was not only necessity but ritual. Every life taken honored with thanks. Every shadow on the plain mirrored in song and dance, for people understood that to survive in a world of giants was not only to wield tools but to hold respect, to weave balance through belief. Drums fashioned from stretched hides beat in rhythm with the heart. Flutes carved from bone carried melodies that echoed the wind. Voices rose in chant beneath the stars, each sound a bridge between the known and the unseen. And in this music, humans found courage, comfort, and connection, binding themselves not only to one another, but to the vastness around them, to the spirits that breathed in animals, rivers, and storms. Firelight painted faces as shamans closed their eyes and entered trances, whispering to spirits for guidance, weaving dreams into visions, visions into teachings. Teaching that life was not a straight path, but a circle, a rhythm of birth and death, of seasons and return, of herds that vanished and returned again, of glaciers that came and retreated, all part of a pattern too immense to grasp fully but felt deeply, carried in bones and songs. And thus the spiritual giants rose not in size but in meaning, shaping the inner landscape as much as mammoths shaped the outer one. In this world, humans were never alone, for every rustle in grass, every shadow in flame, every star overhead was alive with presence, with story, with spirit. And so the people walked with reverence, their lives small in measure but infinite, in meaning, because they lived in dialogue with a universe filled with voices, a chorus of giants that spoke through thunder, through stone, through the breath of animals, through the silence of snow. And as stories grew, so too did identity. For to tell where one came from, to name ancestors, to imagine spirits walking beside the living, was to anchor the self in time, to say not only we are here, but we belong, we continue, we are part of something larger than hunger and fear, larger than ice and fire, something as enduring as the handprint pressed in ochre against cold stone, a silent yet eternal whisper across generations. And thus, the giants of spirit and story became as real as the mammoths outside, for they lived not in flesh, but in memory, not in footprints, but in imagination. And they endure even now, carried through myths and songs, through symbols carved into cliffs and bones, reminders that humanity's greatest strength was not only the spear or the fire, but the story, the quiet brilliance of weaving meaning into existence, of finding light in darkness, of filling the vast silence of the ice, age with voices that still echo across time. From the frozen silence of tundra and the wide plains where mammoths roamed, humanity's footsteps turned inward, toward valleys carved by water and forests thick with shadow. For in the great Ice Age world, rivers and trees stood as giants as mighty as beasts or glaciers, shaping life with a quiet persistence that could not be ignored. And here people learned to listen to new rhythms, to bend their survival to the currents of water and the whispers of leaves. For rivers were not merely streams, but living pathways, carving landscapes across millennia, carrying ice melt from distant mountains to fertile valleys, swelling in spring with snowmelt, shrinking in winter until stone beds cracked with frost, and humans followed them as faithfully as they followed. Herds for rivers promised fish darting in silver schools, promised reeds for weaving, promised drink and cleansing, promised a map that guided the way forward, and along their banks camps were set. Fires burned, and children learned to cast nets braided from sinew and fiber, to spear fish with sharpened bone, to watch the water's surface for ripples that spoke of abundance below. And forests, vast and untamed, rose like cathedrals of green, their canopies so thick that sunlight fell in shafts like golden rivers, their floors alive with roots, moss, and the rustle of hidden creatures. And into this world humans stepped, with caution and awe, learning the calls of birds, the habits of deer, the dangers of bears and great cats, gathering berries and nuts, stripping bark for fibers, carving bows from resilient wood, all acts that turned forest from obstacle into teacher. Here, survival was not only about hunting, but about learning balance, taking only what could be replaced, listening to the rhythm of seasons, for to strip a grove bare was to silence its promise, but to gather with patience was to ensure its gifts returned each year, and so knowledge deepened, passed in whispers and gestures, in stories told beneath branches, heavy with snow or heavy with fruit. A living library carried not in books, but in memory, etched into children's minds, like patterns of bark and leaf. In rivers and forests, humanity found not only sustenance, but spirit. For the sound of water became music, the rustle of leaves became language, storms became teachers, and animals that lived within, otters, beavers, birds, deer, were not only prey but companions in the great circle of existence, each one a presence to be respected, each one a lesson in patience, in movement, in resilience. Nights in these valleys were softer than tundra nights, the air thick with mist and the chorus of frogs, the flicker of firelight mirrored in the surface of streams, and here humans began to dream differently, not only of survival against giants, of claw and ice, but of belonging, of harmony with landscapes that gave as much as they demanded. And so the rivers and forests became giants in their own right, shaping not with tusks or teeth, but with water and root, with shade and song, binding humanity to a deeper understanding of place, of continuity, of the truth that to endure was not only to conquer, but to coexist. And in this coexistence, culture blossomed. For rivers carried not only fish, but stories. Forests gave not only wood, but myth. And so people sang of water spirits who guided canoes, of trees that whispered wisdom, of animals who spoke in dreams, each tale another thread in the great hum. And from this, humans learned strategy, patience, and the power of cooperation, lessons that transformed survival from chance into choice. And still, awe ran deeper than fear, for predators were woven into the very stories told around the fire. Spirits of strength, cunning, and shadow, their images painted in ochre on cave walls alongside mammoths and bison, their forms honored even as their presence haunted, because people knew that predators were necessary, that without their pressure the herds would grow too vast, the balance would falter, the rhythm would break. And so predators, though feared, were also revered as keepers of the cycle, guardians of balance in a world too immense to belong to one creature alone. And within the heart of each story lay recognition that humanity itself was also predator, fragile yet cunning, weak in body but strong in fire and patience, walking the thin line between hunted and hunter, kin to both the prey they pursued and the beasts that pursued them. And in this duality lay a strange kind of kinship, as if humans, lions, wolves, and saber-tooths were all participants in the same great game, each testing the other, each shaping the other's fate. Still, the nights were heavy with tension, when firelight flickered against the eyes that gleamed just beyond its reach, when the snap of a twig made hunters grip their spears, when the silence itself seemed alive. For in those moments, the presence of predators was not just outside the camp, but inside the heart, a constant reminder that life was always fragile, always contested, always shared. And yet, from this closeness to danger, something remarkable grew. Courage, the kind that does not roar or boast, but breathes slowly in the dark, holding steady, whispering songs, keeping the fire alive, trusting that small flames and steady hearts could endure even when surrounded by giants of fang and claw. And so humanity lived with predators, not as enemies to be destroyed, but as shadows to be respected, forces to be learned from, woven into myth and memory, until their images lived forever, not only in caves, but in the human spirit itself, symbols of vigilance, patience, and the deep truth that survival is never solitary, but always shared, always balanced, always shaped by the presence of giants in the night. In the stillness of caves where the air hung heavy with damp stone and the scent of ash, humanity encountered another kind of giant, not mammoths on the plains or lions in the grass, but the vast immensity of imagination itself, a force as powerful, and enduring as glaciers, for within the flickering glow of torches on rough stone walls, hands trace shapes of bison, mammoths, horses, and lions, each line etched not only in ochre and charcoal, but in memory, in reverence, in the deep need to speak to the silence, with images that would outlast breath. And in those moments, the first seeds of spirit and story were born, giving shape to a truth older than language, that humans were not only survivors, but dreamers, weaving meaning into the world around them. In caves like Chauvet and Lascaux, deep in the earth where darkness swallowed all but the flame, the walls came alive with running herds, with spirals of dots and handprints pressed in red, as if people reached through stone itself to say, "We are here, we endure." And in these gestures, the giants of the mind rose as tall as glaciers, for to tell a story was to create permanence, to fix fleeting breath into eternity. Around fires, stories carried spirits into the night, tales of animals who were not merely beasts, but guides, protectors, and ancestors, mammoths who bore the earth on their backs, lions who guarded the sun, birds whose wings carried prayers to the sky. And in these myths, fear became reverence, survival became ceremony, danger became teaching, until every hunt was not only necessity, but ritual. Every life taken honored with thanks, every shadow on the plain mirrored in song and dance, for people understood that to survive in a world of giants was not only to wield tools, but to hold respect, to weave balance through belief. Drums fashioned from stretched hides beat in rhythm with the heart, flutes carved from bone carried melodies that echoed the wind. Voices rose in chant beneath the stars, each sound a bridge between the known and the unseen. And in this music, humans found courage, comfort, and connection, binding themselves not only to one another, but to the vastness around them, to the spirits that breathed in animals, rivers, and storms. Firelight painted faces as shamans closed their eyes and entered trances, whispering to spirits for guidance, weaving dreams into visions, visions into teachings, teaching that life was not a straight path but a circle, a rhythm of birth and death, of seasons and return, of herds that vanished and returned again, of glaciers that came and retreated, all part of a pattern too immense to grasp fully but felt deeply, carried in bones and songs. And thus, the spiritual giants rose not in size but in meaning, shaping the inner landscape as much as mammoths shaped the outer one. In this world, humans were never alone. For every rustle in grass, every shadow in flame, every star overhead was alive with presence, with story, with spirit. And so the people walked with reverence, their lives small in measure, but infinite in meaning, because they lived in dialogue with a universe filled with voices, a chorus of giants that spoke through thunder, through stone, through the breath of animals, through the silence of snow. And as stories grew, so too did identity, for to tell where one came from, to name ancestors, to imagine spirits walking beside the living, was to anchor the self in time, to say not only we are here, but we belong. We continue. We are part of something larger than hunger and fear, larger than ice and fire, something as enduring as the handprint pressed in ochre against cold stone, a silent yet eternal whisper across generations. And thus, the giants of spirit and story became as real as the mammoths outside, for they lived not in flesh, but in memory, not in footprints, but in imagination, and they endure even now, carried through myths and songs, through symbols carved into cliffs and bones, reminders that humanity's greatest strength was not only the spear or the fire, but the story, the quiet brilliance of weaving meaning into existence, of finding light in darkness, of filling the vast silence of the ice, age with voices that still echo across time. From the frozen silence of tundra and the wide plains where mammoths roamed, humanity's footsteps turned inward, toward valleys carved by water and forests thick with shadow. For in the great Ice Age world, rivers and trees stood as giants as mighty as beasts or glaciers, shaping life with a quiet persistence that could not be ignored. And here, people learned to listen to new rhythms, to bend their survival to the currents of water and the whispers of leaves. For rivers were not merely streams, but living pathways, carving landscapes across millennia, carrying ice melt from distant mountains to fertile valleys, swelling in spring with snowmelt, shrinking in winter until stone beds cracked with frost, and humans followed them as faithfully as they followed. Herds for rivers promised fish darting in silver schools, promised reeds for weaving, promised drink and cleansing, promised a map that guided the way forward, and along their banks camps were set, fires burned, and children learned to cast nets braided from sinew and fibre, to spear fish with sharpened bone, to watch the water's surface for ripples that spoke of abundance below, and forests, vast and untamed, rose like cathedrals of green, their canopies so thick that sunlight fell in shafts like golden rivers, their floors alive with roots, moss, and the rustle of hidden creatures. And into this world, humans stepped, with caution and awe, learning the calls of birds, the habits of deer, the dangers of bears and great cats, gathering berries and nuts, stripping bark for fibers, carving bows from resilient wood, all acts that turned forest from obstacle into teacher. Here, survival was not only about hunting, but about learning balance, taking only what could be replaced, listening to the rhythm of seasons. For to strip a grove bare was to silence its promise, but to gather with patience was to ensure its gifts returned each year. And so knowledge deepened, passed in whispers and gestures, in stories told beneath branches heavy with snow or heavy with fruit. A living library carried not in books, but in memory, etched into children's minds like patterns of bark and leaf. In rivers and forests, humanity found not only sustenance, but spirit. For the sound of water became music, the rustle of leaves became language, storms became teachers, and animals that lived within, otters, beavers, birds, deer, were not only prey but companions in the great circle of existence, each one a presence to be respected, each one a lesson in patience, in movement, in resilience. Nights in these valleys were softer than tundra nights, the air thick with mist and the chorus of frogs, the flicker of firelight mirrored in the surface of streams. And here humans began to dream differently, not only of survival against giants, of claw and ice, but of belonging, of harmony with landscapes that gave as much as they demanded. And so the rivers and forests became giants in their own right, shaping not with tusks or teeth, but with water and root, with shade and song, binding humanity to a deeper understanding of place, of continuity, of the truth that to endure was not only to conquer, but to coexist. And in this coexistence, culture blossomed. For rivers carried not only fish, but stories. Forests gave not only wood, but myth. And so people sang of water spirits who guided canoes, of trees that whispered wisdom, of animals who spoke in dreams, each tale another thread in the great hum, teaching that survival, at its deepest, is not war against the world, but communion with it. The Ice Age world was not only defined by beasts with tusks or forests thick with shadow, nor by rivers that carved stone, but by a greater, more invisible giant that shaped every life and every choice, time itself, carried on the back of the seasons, whose endless turning became both promise and warning. For to the first humans, the cycle of spring, summer, autumn, and winter was no simple backdrop, but a colossal force, a giant whose breath could nourish or destroy. And so they learned to move with it, to read its signs in the tilt of the sun, the scent of air, the migration of herds, the blossoming of small flowers beneath snow, and each season taught its own lesson, whispered in tones both gentle and harsh, for spring was the rebirth of the land, when rivers swelled and the earth softened, when mammoths calved and birds returned, and people rejoiced in the abundance of fish, in the first greens gathered along stream banks, in the feeling of warmth spreading again through soil and skin. But summer came with fire in its breath, long days of hunting under burning skies, berries ripening, grasses swaying golden, a time of building strength and gathering stores, while autumn arrived cloaked in colors of flame, reminding all that nothing lasts forever, teaching preparation, urging the storing of meat, the weaving of furs, the shaping of shelters for winter, the most towering of all the seasons, waited always, a giant of silence and ice, descending with winds sharp as blades, nights long and heavy, food scarce, and survival uncertain. And yet it was in winter that humanity found its greatest strength. For around fire's glow, people huddled closer, telling stories that stretched back generations. Stories of the great hunt, of ancestors who endured storms fiercer than this one, of spirits who walked upon snow to watch over the living. And in those stories, hearts grew resilient. Courage was passed like a torch, and winter became not only trial, but teacher, pressing upon people the truth that endurance required unity, patience, and memory. And so the seasons, though harsh, offered rhythm, a song that guided migrations, that taught people when to stay, when to move, when to plant roots, when to lift them again. And in this rhythm, humanity grew wiser, their lives braided with the turning of the earth, their faith shaped by the knowledge that no hardship was permanent, no abundance eternal, but both were part of a wheel that spun without end, carrying joy into sorrow and sorrow back into joy. And so the seasons became giants, invisible but vast, lords of time who marked every step, every fire, every cradle of a newborn child. And as people lay down to rest beneath the stars, the hush of night wrapping them in silence, they could feel the presence of these giants in the cool breeze or the first frost, in the sound of leaves falling or the soft patter of spring rain. And they knew that though they were small, though their fires were brief, they belonged to a world immense and eternal, carried always forward by the turning seasons, by giants too vast to see, yet too near to ever forget. Above the forests and plains, beyond the rivers and the glaciers, there stretched another giant, one so vast that no beast could rival it, no mountain could equal its height, no river could reach its edge. And this was the sky itself, the boundless dome that arched over every campfire and every step. And in that endless canopy lived the stars, shimmering like distant fires, eternal companions of humankind, silent and unyielding, and yet full of guidance. For the sky was more than empty space. It was a presence, a giant whose moods were written in shifting clouds, in the warmth of dawn, in the storms that rolled across valleys with the weight of gods. And so humans learned to look upward as much as outward, studying the movements of sun and moon, of stars wheeling in their eternal dance, using their patterns to mark seasons, to know when herds would return, when snow would fall, when rivers would swell. And in this way, the sky became a map as well, as a mystery, a teacher written in light, reminding them that life was part of something vast and unmeasurable. And at night, when the fire's glow softened and silence stretched, people would lie back on furs, eyes tracing constellations, naming them after animals and ancestors, weaving myths to give form to what they saw, saying that a mammoth walked across the heavens, or a great hunter chased his prey forever, or spirits of the departed watched from the stars, guiding the living. And these stories soothed fear, gave shape to the unknown, made the endless dark seem familiar. And in that act, imagination became survival, for belief steadied hearts where reason faltered. And the sky, in its immensity, returned the gift, offering signs in auroras shimmering green and red above frozen lands, in comets streaking like fire across night, in eclipses that turned day to twilight, awe-inspiring events that made people tremble and bow, for they felt the presence of giants, powers too great to touch yet close enough to feel. And over time, humanity's bond with the heavens deepened, the stars becoming companions in migration, always present, always reliable, whispering direction when rivers twisted and forests confused, reminding travelers that though the world below shifted, the heavens above remained constant. And in this constancy, people found comfort, found trust, found a rhythm greater than fear, so that the sky itself became a vast guardian, its stars eternal fires never extinguished, its sun the daily promise of return, its moon a silver lantern softening the darkness. And in this way, the sky and stars became giants, not of flesh or stone, but of eternity, their vastness humbling, their beauty uplifting, their silence teaching patience, and as humans dreamed beneath them, lulled by the slow drift of constellations, they carried within their hearts the truth that they were small but not lost. For the heavens stretched over them like a blanket, limitless yet intimate, eternal yet always new, a reminder that they were never alone, that even in the coldest nights of the Ice Age, fires burned above as well as below, and the giants of sky and stars watched over them, timeless and kind. If the sky above was an eternal giant, distant and untouchable, then at the heart of human life burned another giant, smaller in size, yet no less powerful, a companion that crackled, roared, whispered, and glowed. Fire, the gift that transformed. Survival into something deeper, the spirit that lived at the center of every camp. And to the first people, it was not simply warmth or light, but a living presence, a being with moods that could bless or destroy. For in its flames, humanity saw both protector and predator, both teacher and test. And they came to treat it with reverence, guarding embers as one guards a child, feeding it with wood and breath, learning how to coax it back from ash, how to carry it from place to place in bundles of bark or bowls of stone, so that wherever they wandered, fire wandered with them, a loyal spirit tied to their destiny. Around it the cold was banished, shadows pushed back, predators kept at bay, meat cooked into nourishment, plants softened into healing, and bones hardened into tools. Each spark a miracle, each flame a promise, and in its glow stories were born. For fire gave not only warmth to the body, but warmth to imagination, its flicker casting shapes against cave walls, inspiring tales of giants, animals, ancestors, spirits that lived beyond sight. And in this way, fire was not only a tool, but a bridge between the visible and the invisible, between flesh and dream, between survival and meaning. Yet fire was no servant. It was a giant of will, and those who disrespected it learned fear. For flames could leap from hearth to forest, devouring as quickly as it comforted, turning abundance into ash, reminding humanity that every gift carried responsibility, that every spirit demanded care, and so rituals grew around it. Offerings of fat or meat placed into flames, prayers spoken in whispers as sparks rose toward the stars, as if messages could ride smoke into the heavens, reaching ancestors who listened from above. And slowly, fire and spirit became one. For in fire people saw the soul made visible, saw life itself dancing in orange and red, saw breath transformed into light, and so fire was more than heat. It was presence, a giant in miniature whose companionship shaped humanity into who they would become, guiding their nights, steadying their fears, reminding them that though the world was vast and cold, they carried within their hands a spark of eternity, a piece of the sun itself, a guardian and a teacher, a spirit of both destruction and creation, a giant whose voice crackled in the silence, whose glow lulled tired eyes, whose warmth made the Ice Age world not only survivable but sacred. Long before the first word was carved into clay or scratched onto stone, long before symbols gave permanence to thought, humanity carried its wisdom, its fears and its dreams in a giant made not of flesh or fire, but of memory and story. For within the fragile minds of each person lived a power greater than any mammoth, glacier, or storm, the ability to remember, to speak, to weave the past into sound that could travel across generations, binding the living to those long gone. And so stories became the truest giants of all, invisible yet eternal. Their footprints pressed not into earth, but into the hearts of listeners, their shadows stretching across centuries. Around the flicker of fire, in the hush of night, elders told of hunts both glorious and tragic, of spirits who guarded rivers, of beasts who once roamed the skies, of ancestors whose courage lit the path ahead. And these tales, carried in whispers and chants, were ain. And story the first bridge across time. And as voices rose and faded, as one generation passed into another, these giants of memory and story grew stronger, shaping not only knowledge but belief. For what is myth if not truth? Clothed in poetry, What is story if not memory made eternal? And so the people lived not only in the present, but also in the vast company of all who came before, their lives braided together by invisible threads, their struggles softened by knowing others had endured the same. And in this way, story comforted, as much as it taught, becoming a balm against fear, a lantern in the darkness, a lullaby for restless hearts. And memory itself was sacred, for to forget was to break the chain, to silence ancestors, to lose wisdom hard-earned through suffering. And so remembering became a duty, a reverence, a form of survival as vital as food or fire. And when eyes, closed in sleep, dreams carried the same threads, weaving visions that felt like stories told by the world itself, teaching through symbol, guiding through mystery, whispering truths too deep for daylight. And in this way, memory, story, and dream merged into one great presence, one giant whose body was woven of voices and echoes, whose breath was the sound of words passed from lips to ears, whose heart beat in the rhythm of tale and song. And though unseen, this giant stood beside every fire, lay beneath every star, followed every migration, a companion as eternal as the sky and as close as a mother's whisper, proving that survival was never only of the body, but of the spirit, carried on the wings of memory and the everlasting giants of story. In the long unfolding of the Ice Age, when glaciers advanced and retreated like slow-breathing titans, and herds shifted across continents like living rivers, there rose yet another giant, one that walked beside humanity at every step, silent, yet relentless, the giant of change and migration, for nothing in that world was still, no valley eternal, no river unchanging, and so to survive meant to move, to adapt, to follow paths carved not only by instinct, but by necessity. And in this endless wandering, humanity found both hardship and destiny, for the land was always shifting beneath their feet, forests spreading and vanishing, seas rising and falling, ice walls melting into rivers that cut new boundaries. And so people followed herds of reindeer north and then south again, walked across frozen bridges of land like Beringia into unknown continents, traced coastlines where fish were plentiful, crossed deserts where survival was a whisper, each journey both exile and promise, each migration a story etched into the bones of their children, teaching that home was not fixed stone, but the strength to carry fire forward, to remember paths, to honor ancestors by stepping into new horizons, and change itself, though feared, was also gift, for it sharpened resilience, made the people inventive, forced them to craft new tools, to find new foods, to learn from strange animals and climates, to bend but not break. And in bending they grew strong, becoming the most adaptable creature the earth had known, able to walk from ice deserts to steaming jungles, from mountain peaks to ocean shores, carrying not only survival, but story, song, memory, and fire into every new land. And though migration meant loss, of valleys left behind, of rivers no longer seen, of graves buried in places never returned to, it also meant expansion, the widening of vision, the mingling of clans, the exchange of ideas. And with each step, the giant of change whispered its eternal lesson, that nothing is permanent, that life is motion, that to resist is to suffer, but to walk with change is to endure. And so humanity became children of the road, heirs of the horizon, their footprints scattered like seeds across continents, their firelight blooming in caves, in valleys, in coasts, each one a flicker of resilience, proof that they had listened well to the giants of change and migration, and in this listening had discovered their true gift, not strength of muscle or swiftness of claw, but the ability to move, to imagine new beginnings, to carry forward a future written step by step, horizon by horizon, guided always by the unseen giant of change, who walked with them through every storm and into every dawn. At last, as the great ice age drew toward its end, when glaciers slowly retreated like weary giants returning to their slumber, and valleys once locked in ice softened into meadows, a new presence emerged. Not a beast with tusks, nor a forest, nor a river, nor even the stars above, but a giant of tomorrow, invisible yet immense. For it was the future itself, carried in the quiet steps of humanity, as they walked out of the age of ice and into a world forever changed. Mammoths faded into memory. Cave lions and woolly rhinoceroses disappeared from the plains. Forests spread where tundra once lay. Seas rose and swallowed land bridges that had once guided migrations. And yet through every loss, humanity endured, carrying with them not only fire and tools, but the wisdom of memory, the rhythm of story, the resilience born from countless migrations. For though the world shifted, they did not walk into it as strangers, but as children of change, ready to adapt again, ready to shape the earth as the earth had shaped them. And in this time, new possibilities opened. Seeds were planted that would one day grow into villages, then cities, then civilizations. Yet within them still lived the echoes of giants, the mammoth's strength in their determination, the rivers' flow in their migrations, the forest's patience in their traditions, the fire's spirit in their imagination, the stars' guidance in their dreams. And so, even as the Ice Age ended, it did not vanish, for its lessons remained woven into their very being. Each survival a story passed forward, each hardship a thread in the tapestry of humanity. And tomorrow became a giant not of fear, but of promise, calling them onward, reminding them that they were no longer just wanderers of ice and stone, but dreamers, builders, keepers of memory, heirs to every giant that had walked before. And as they lay beneath skies both familiar and new, listening to rivers still singing, watching stars still shining, they could feel the presence of all that had come before, walking beside them into the future, whispering that though the Ice Age was ending, the journey of humanity had only just begun, carried on the shoulders of giants into a tomorrow without end. And so, as the long echo of the Ice Age fades into memory, we come to the quiet realization that this story was never only about glaciers and mammoths, nor about tools of stone or fires glowing against the night, but about the deeper thread that carried humanity through every frozen valley and across every vast horizon, a thread woven of endurance, curiosity, and the unshakable bond of community. For when we look back across those thousands of years, we see not only survival, but the shaping of something greater than survival. The birth of imagination, of culture, of meaning, a slow unfolding that turned the wandering footsteps of small bands into the foundation of everything that followed. We picture the giants that once filled the earth. Woolly mammoths with tusks like crescents of ivory, towering sloths moving with the patience of trees, saber-toothed cats gliding like shadows across the plains. And we understand that their presence was not just an obstacle, but a teacher, showing humanity how to adapt, how to endure, how to respect power far greater than their own. And though those giants have vanished into extinction, their memory lives on in the marrow of human stories, in myths of creatures larger than life, in symbols carved on cave walls and whispered by firelight, because to remember them is to remember the age when the world was wild and humans were still learning what it meant to belong. And yet the true giant of the Ice Age was not the mammoth or the glacier, but humanity itself, fragile in body, but immense in persistence, carrying fire through endless winters, weaving memory into songs, teaching each generation not only how to hunt and gather, but how to dream. For dreaming was the secret weapon, the hidden flame that allowed humans to imagine shelters before they were built, tools before they were carved, journeys before they were taken. And in this way, every footstep, pressed into ice, became more than survival. It became a declaration that the future itself was possible. Imagine the long nights when stars glittered cold and distant, when the wind howled across the tundra, when food was scarce and death seemed near. Yet in those same nights, voices rose in song, hands painted walls with ochre, children laughed. By the fire, and out of such fragile moments, grew the resilience of an entire species, proof that even in darkness humanity carried its own light. And as the Ice Age ended, as glaciers melted and seas rose, as forests spread and rivers swelled, humanity did not end with it, but transformed, carrying forward every lesson of the frozen world, reshaping it into farming, into villages, into stories of gods and spirits, into the beginnings of civilization. But always at the core still the same flame that had burned in caves and tundra, the will to endure, to imagine, to wonder, to belong. And so we sit now, tens of thousands of years later, in cities lit not by firewood, but by electricity, telling stories not on cave walls, but through screens. Yet the essence is unchanged, for we are still the children of the Ice Age, still the heirs of fire and stone, still carrying the memory of giants in our bones, still restless beneath the stars, still drawn to horizons. And in this recognition lies the true conclusion.